Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. I was looking at my computer screen when she entered the apartment. She had been coming home late from work for a long time. Today was no different from the others. It was almost 10 o'clock. The kids and I have already had dinner and done our homework. They had been in bed for almost an hour. They didn't even ask about Mom or why she wasn't home. It was quite recently, and it upset me. I've spent the last hour researching our finances. Over the past 2 years, the situation has deteriorated dramatically. Our income has decreased significantly, but my wife did not notice it. She was still spending money freely, as if we didn't care about anything. I just finished paying the last bills. We may be able to hold out for a couple more months. I was also reviewing my life plan. Maybe I made a mistake. For the past 2 years, I've been staring at a time bomb, wondering if it would ever explode. I always assumed that this would happen at some point, but I began to doubt it. I don't know how long she stood and looked at me. Lately, I've been getting lost in my own thoughts more and more often. The loss of time was a byproduct. Finally, with her arms crossed and an all too familiar expression of disdain on her face, she spoke. "Michael, I want a divorce. I'm not sure how I felt at that moment. My spirit was so overloaded with doubts and self-loathing that I was almost numb to any new emotions. It wasn't really that funny, but I tried to stifle my laughter anyway. My wife, with whom I have lived for 17 years, has just told me that everything is over between us, that everything we have built together will eventually be torn apart. I haven't felt this kind of emotion in a long time, and it almost made me smile. Easement. I looked at her for just a moment, allowing myself to finally be transported back to our happy times. Then I came back to reality. Good. I was a better programmer than a manager. Unfortunately, programmers are promoted to project managers, then to department heads, and then to senior management. That's how I ended up as a senior product development manager. It was just a fancy title for a salesman. In fact, at that time, I was the most qualified for this position. I almost single-handedly created our flagship product line. I nursed her in infancy, helped her grow, for 6 consecutive upgrades. I knew our product better than anyone. When customers had questions, I had the answers. When our employees had problems, I knew how to solve them. Add to that a new hairstyle and an overly expensive suit, and I looked the part. The salary increase and benefits that I received in connection with the promotion did not cause me any complaints. I would say that I was mostly happy with my work, but I loved programming and really missed it. In my position, I didn't have the opportunity to do this. There were just too many meetings and phone calls to afford the luxury of going back to the lines of code. I was forced to watch a new batch of young, bright-eyed guys who were trying to outdo each other with their latest developments. I won't lie, being the boss was worth it, but I always wanted my job responsibilities to be a little different. It was no surprise when I was fired from Chicago Technology Solutions. If I were the boss, I would do exactly the same thing. My attendance at meetings was sporadic at best, and too many deadlines were missed. At that time, I wasn't trying to get fired, but I really didn't make any attempts to keep my job at CTS. I was depressed for a long time. It took me almost 3 months to get out of my initial depression and try to move on, but this was not successful either. It took me another month to find a way out of the predicament I found myself in, at least one that I could live with. I think I'd go crazy if I didn't have kids. They had an impeccable daily routine that helped me get my life back on a positive track. Breakfast, school, snack, homework, dinner, sleep. Breakfast, school, snack, homework, dinner, bed. That was my mantra, and it helped me find my way. I threw myself into the work of my father sitting at home. I took over all the household and taxi duties. The children were genuinely happy to have me in the house. It made me realize that I had some value. I wasn't completely worthless. If my wife felt these changes in our family dynamics, she never talked about it. I'm pretty sure she didn't even notice. I met Jennifer Riley at a frat party. I almost decided not to go. I joined the fraternity for the doors it would open after graduation, not to attend parties during my studies. I decided that I would need all the help I could get. My grades were excellent, so it wasn't a concern. However, everything else about me was just average. Height, weight, appearance, character, medium. My name, Michael, was the most popular name from 1961 to 1988. Absolutely average. To be honest, when I was away from the computer, there was nothing so unique about me. Dates? I've had a few. A relationship? Well, not so much. I was good at keeping myself company even in my senior year of college, until I saw Jennifer Riley. Jennifer was almost as ordinary as me. I realized that the average woman looks much better. She was a bit withdrawn. I watched her for quite a long time before I plucked up the courage to speak to her. Our first meeting was short and quiet, but the acquaintance took place. Over the next few weeks, we would meet for coffee and study together in the library. We talked for almost 2 months before our first real date. From that moment, the most fantastic time in my life began. 15 years of bliss. Our courtship was short, and our engagement was even shorter. Shortly after graduating from university, we got married and moved into our first apartment in Chicago. We took the morning and evening train to and from our first job. We barely made ends meet, but we were together. We had almost everything in common. Family stories, dating experiences, common interests and goals. Where we didn't match, we merged. If something didn't work out for me, Jennifer did it. If she had a flaw, then that was one of my strengths. I managed our shared finances better. Jennifer was better able to handle the schedule of our social and family affairs. We worked together, and our lives began to improve rapidly. Over the next few years, we were both promoted several times. Our group of friends has expanded significantly. We were able to save up money to buy our first home as well as travel and have fun. Our life began the same way as our relationship. Slowly. We've been holding hands and kissing since the first date. We switched to active petting when we realized that we had an exclusive relationship. Our virginity lasted until the night of our engagement. Since then, our passion has grown along with our shared success. Jennifer quit her job 8 years later, when our son Jacob was born. A little over a year later, our daughter Emily was born. Yes, I know that their names were the most popular when they were born. It was kind of a family tradition. We bought a 3-bedroom house in the suburbs where there was a place for a dog. We bought a family sedan and a minivan. In general, our life was going well. 2 children, a pet, a house, and 2 cars. Absolutely average. I didn't think I could be happier. I was wrong. My promotion to manager came shortly after Emily's first birthday. It was almost like a reward for the years when I was ignored as one of the average and I didn't complain. As I said, my new salary was unremarkable and we didn't complain. I had a flexible schedule. I worked from home most of the day, coming to the office for staff and management meetings. They say money can't buy happiness. I think it's true. But what you can buy is stylish clothes and well-groomed, better medical care, a new house in a better neighborhood, and self-confidence. I've gone from an average level to a slightly above average level. My wife went from being average, which I thought was beautiful, to just above average, which I thought was pretty damn cool. Our life, which I always thought was good, has reached a new level. We traveled more and could spend time with the children, saving more and more money for retirement. When Emily started elementary school, Jennifer decided she wanted to return to work part-time. She quickly found a job that she thought she would like at a startup marketing firm. She went to the office when she took the kids to school. She ended her day when it was time to pick them up. It was the icing on the cake. We didn't need her salary, so we were able to save it. According to my forecasts, by the time the children graduate from college, we will be able to retire and live very comfortably. I found out that my wife was cheating on me by accident 3 months before our 15th wedding anniversary. It was my birthday. Actually, I found the evidence 2 days before my birthday. I just didn't know about it. It took me a few weeks to put it all together. I didn't pay attention to the fact that my wife wanted to play a more active role in her new job. This meant that she would work a few more hours a week, and I would have to pick up the children from school. But it didn't affect my schedule at all, and I was glad of it. When, about 3 months later, I noticed that she was often distracted, I asked her about it. She replied that she was trying to find herself in the office and was a little tense. I decided to take on more responsibilities around the house to lighten her burden a bit. When our passionate life began to decline noticeably, we talked about it. She said she was getting old and no longer needed to make love like a rabbit. It was the first time I heard the word making love from her, but the situation has improved. Our life brightened up for a few weeks, but then it faded away again. I didn't dare to talk about it again for fear of a quarrel. I was almost on the edge when I discovered the gift. The weather had turned significantly colder, and I was looking for one of my sweaters. I took on the duties of a laundress, and more than once confused which closet to put clothes in. I was sorting through the sweaters on the shelf of her closet when I saw him, behind some old shoeboxes. It was hard to miss him. The pink box and white ribbon from the lingerie store were unmistakably recognizable. The postcard addressed to my beloved excited me. A small war of thoughts broke out in my head for a moment. Should I watch? Should I wait? I decided to take a look. I wasn't sure I could wait until my birthday to rape my wife after reading the postcard. Please excuse the packaging in which this gift came. A real gift, you can unwrap it on your birthday when I put on what's in the box, then you can have my last virginity. Love, Jennifer. I made sure to meet her at the door with flowers, gave her a foot massage, and cooked her favorite dinner. Her reaction was not what I expected. It looked like she tolerated my affection. On my birthday, I made sure that the children finished their homework early. I didn't want any problems to interfere with my gift. I was a little surprised when Jennifer came home late from work. I was even more confused when she asked me what would be for dinner. But I was ready to play along to get my surprise. I said we should go get pizza. The children were amused, and we went. I conspired with the waitress, and just before leaving, the waiter serenaded me with a happy birthday. I thought I saw surprise in my wife's eyes, but she quickly recovered. "I'll give you your present later, Michael," she said, smiling. The journey home was stressful for me. I almost had an accident. The 15 minutes while the children were getting ready for bed were brutal, but the 15 minutes after that, while they were falling asleep, were excruciating. Fortunately, Jennifer returned from an urgent trip to the milk store shortly after they fell asleep. When I got to the bedroom door, Jennifer wasn't in the room. I sat down on the bed. Moments later, she came out of the bathroom in a flannel nightgown, no makeup on her face, and her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. By this point, I was already starting to get a little disappointed in the games. When will I receive my gift? She slid into bed and crawled under the covers. She reached out to turn off the bedroom lamp, but stopped. Oops, I almost forgot. She opened a drawer on the nightstand and took out a small square box wrapped in colorful balloon paper that we used for Michael's last birthday, and handed it to me. "Happy birthday, dear." And that was all. She turned over, turned off the light, and fell asleep. I was too shocked to even open her gift. The next day, my depression began in full force. I replayed the events of the day over and over in my head and couldn't figure out what I had done that had so obviously ruined our evening. I was completely at a loss. In my despair, I stayed for almost 2 weeks. This damn gift was almost flashing a pink light at me, heralding my failure. I've heard all these cliches. The husband will be the last to know, etc. I have to be honest and say that I was really in the dark. The idea that Jennifer could cheat on me was so alien that I never ever thought it was possible. But that was the first thing that came to my mind when she called home 13 days after my birthday and informed me that she would be home late. Alan turns 30, and the staff invites him to the celebration. I may be late. I don't remember answering her or going to the closet in the bedroom, but I remember looking at the empty place where my gift once stood. I also remember terrible chest pain and vomiting in the bathroom. For longer than I want to admit, I thought I might have a heart attack, and for a few moments I hoped it was true, and that I would die soon. Alan Henderson was Jennifer's boss, a sly, arrogant advertising executive who was several years younger than both Jennifer and me. I only met him once, but I remember that I didn't like him very much, mainly because he seemed so insincere when he spoke. Emily brought me to my senses. "Are you okay, Dad?" It took a few seconds before my eyes focused on my daughter, who was hovering over me on the verge of tears. "I'm fine, honey. Dad just ate something that his stomach didn't like. I'll be out in a minute. I just need to get myself cleaned up." In the end, I did get out of the bathroom, although I don't remember much after that. I remember grabbing my dusty bottle of scotch. Judging by the headache the next morning, I knew I'd had a few drinks. I had no idea when Jennifer came home. When I found her in the kitchen this morning, feeding the children, she didn't look like anything unusual had happened. She was just going about her usual business, and only the slight shudder that I saw on her face when she sat down to eat killed all the remaining love in me. It was very subtle, but it was there. I would like to write about how I stood up to my cheating bitch wife. But I didn't do it. I was just devastated. It was all I could do to move on, and for several weeks I didn't get better. I was like a zombie. Every day, when I realized that my wife was quietly doing household chores, I felt worse and worse. I thought I'd hit rock bottom. It took me the weekend of my 15th wedding anniversary to shake myself up and decide to act. Maybe I wouldn't have done anything. I was acting like a wimp. I knew that. I would like to say that I was shocked. There's probably some kind of technical psychological terminology for my behavior. If my father were alive, he would just say that I was acting like a wimp. He would be right. It was only when my wife announced that she needed to go to a work conference that the fog lifted from my thoughts. She won't be here for our anniversary. I do not know why it mattered to me. It was just another level of disrespect. But it hurt, mostly because she gave no indication that she even knew about this date. Having drunk myself into unconsciousness on the night of our anniversary, I woke up angry. I've reached my limit. I called my lawyer and made an appointment. I was going to end this farce. I was sure that my life couldn't get any worse. I was wrong. The do not take prisoners attitude with which I entered the lawyer's office was replaced by crushing disbelief. I knew that divorce could be difficult. I thought cheating on my wife would work in my favor. Instead, my lawyer punched hole after hole in my case. I didn't have any evidence of cheating. If I had proof, it wouldn't matter. My wife would have the right to split our property 50-50. I had no proof that my wife was a bad parent. The best hope for me would be joint custody. The income difference also worked in my wife's favor. I would pay spousal maintenance and alimony. Most likely, my wife would have received the right to primary custody and the right to stay in the house, for the benefit of the children. My wife was a cheater, and I was a screwball. I went from depression to frustration. My fool even asked me about it a few weeks later. "You really don't look well, Michael. Is something bothering you?" "No, dear. At least she pretended to care, and I was just wandering through life. Then I was fired. I didn't know it at the time, but it was the best thing that happened to me. The evening news gave me a glimmer of hope. I watched depressive story after depressive story, and it seemed to match my mood perfectly. But then it happened. A major employer on the East Coast went bankrupt. Former employees were trying to get their last paycheck and worried about their pensions. It seemed to me that some people might be in a worse position than me. Then the talking head appeared on the screen again, with its analysis. Employees are likely to win a lawsuit against their former employer, but it won't matter. There's nothing left. All the money is gone. It didn't take me long to connect the dots and make a plan of action. My wife couldn't take what wasn't there. We wouldn't have anything, so we wouldn't share anything. Of course, I was winding myself up, but I was already going to lose half anyway. Did I really care about the rest? My plan started out pretty simple. I was unemployed and had no intention of looking for a job. I was going to spend our savings until there was nothing left. I admit it was a crazy idea. Even I didn't think it would work. But it was something I could grab onto. 2 years is a long time. I was painfully bored when I was alone, which was almost always the case. I realized that Jennifer really was the lifeblood of our group of friends. When she distanced herself from me, I discovered that I didn't have any really strong friendships. I was an only child. Both my parents died young, dad from a heart attack, mom from cancer. I was really lonely. I know that a detailed account of how I lived will be boring for you. I can sum up my life by saying that it was terrible. For 2 years, my children were the only thing that was right in my life. I have enrolled in the executive MBA program. The university was expensive, but local. In one go, I spent almost $120,000. I paid cash for a new luxury SUV, $60,000 minus. I have fully funded educational savings accounts for children. It took another $260,000. I spent thousands on a new wardrobe, and twice a week I started withdrawing more and more cash. I took the kids to school, went to the bank, and drove to the lakeshore. I've never gambled with the money I took with me. A few bucks here and there to entertain yourself somehow. I spent enough to show that I spent the day at the casino, including receipts for lunch, snacks, and parking. The main amount went into a wall safe in our garage. My personal war chest after the divorce in case things go badly. My other expensive purchase? Complete private surveillance of my wife and her lover. I asked for everything I needed. Videos, photos, a daily diary of events. I'm ashamed to say how much it cost me. You're probably wondering if my wife noticed any of my spending? I would say yes, except for gambling. I had to tell her about the transfer of money to the children because I needed her signature on the accounts of the guardians. She saw my car and my clothes. She never said anything about them. I'm sure she thought I was working and that we were still living on Easy Street. She also made some purchases, but I didn't say a word. I've often wondered who benefits from her more frequent underwear purchases. It's just that we've never discussed this topic. We were cordial with each other and communicated daily. It was like putting up with a roommate we didn't particularly like. The time spent with the children was the highlight of my life. I did my best to support any of their interests. We did our homework and played games together. We went to parks, rode bicycles, and went to the cinema. Since I took on the role of a home cook, they seemed interested in helping me. I found some simple recipes and let them do it. Jennifer was usually around at some point during the week. I didn't exclude her from our family activities, but I didn't make any effort to attract her either. If she was around and wanted to participate, she just did it without saying a word. I received a weekly report on my wife's activities. I thought she was just making love to her boss, but actually it was a few guys from her office. A few months later, the company's customers got on its dance card. Did it hurt? Not very. I thought she was like that anyway. The fact that I now had proof didn't move me at all. It wasn't a very interesting sight. The video looked like a poorly shot adult video. In a way, it made me feel better, but not much. It was clear that Alan Henderson was not a very skilled lover, although he had the opportunity to distribute gifts to himself among several different women. This surprised me somewhat. I assumed, based on her gift, that there was some kind of relationship between him and my fool, but in fact, they were more like making love buddies. Despite classes, children, and gambling, I had a lot of free time, so I decided to focus on my life after getting married, which I assumed would come someday. I have started a new exercise regime. I've always been in decent shape, of course, nothing special. But during this time, I have achieved good results in bench press and running endurance. I believe that huge muscles and good looks are mainly genetics, and I clearly did not fit into any of these categories. However, I was personally very pleased with the way I looked. I started researching the latest news about my former industry. I realized that at some point I would need a job. A year away from madness has left me far behind than I thought. I spent several hours every day studying the latest technologies and software packages. I was particularly interested in my old company, CTS. They seemed to be at a standstill. They definitely weren't losing market share. Their earnings were stable, but they weren't gaining momentum. In the technology business, if you stand still, you lose. I also spent a significant amount of time researching divorces. Oh, I've devoted some time to developing new insidious plans to ruin the life of my hopefully soon ex-wife. However, most of my time has been spent studying how divorce affects children. I've already been through most of my pain, and the kids were a big part of it. I wanted to make sure that when their transition period came, I would be fully prepared. There is a huge amount of information that I thought was complete nonsense. 8 more months of my adventure had passed when I started to panic. My wife started coming home at the usual time, and she started talking to me and asking me how my day was. Of course, I answered abruptly, but it didn't bother her. She began to dress more provocatively in bed. It seemed that she was trying to revive the intimacy of our former life. After a few weeks, things got even worse. For a year and a half, she did not take part in our lives and went about her business. Now she was complaining about the lack of communication. She started talking about working on our marriage, and I stopped talking to her. Complete silence. Her attempts at reconciliation continued until her birthday. I left her gift on the dining room table. The wrapping paper should have looked familiar, as I used it from the last gift she gave me. The contents shouldn't have been a surprise either. It took me 6 months to open the last birthday present I received from my wife. It was a watch with a cheap digital dial. When I noticed my birthday present in the impulse shopping department of our nearby convenience store, I was very angry. A $9.95 watch from a fast trade store. Then I saw that they had a suitable female model. I've come to terms with it. I bought them and waited 18 months to give them to her. I wish I could see her reaction, but alas, I wasn't there when she opened it. The children and I had a movie night and returned home quite late. The next day she left before the children and I got up. Suddenly everything was back to normal. Jennifer began to stay in the office later and later. We hardly spoke when she was at home. And finally it happened. Michael, I want a divorce. I hoped she would get it over with quickly, but it took almost a week before I was handed her application. It was almost laughable. Spousal and child support, unequal distribution of property in her favor, mental and emotional cruelty are listed as relevant factors. I decided to give her until next Monday and took the kids camping. I didn't want them to be around, as I would release the hounds. We returned 6 days later, refreshed and refreshed. Jennifer was waiting for us at home. She was sitting alone in the living room. I think she might have had the stomach flu. In any case, she didn't look well. I was wondering which part was the biggest surprise for me. I filed for divorce on the grounds of adultery. I asked for a house, the only real property we have left, and full custody of the children. I asked for spousal and child support because I was unemployed and took care of the children full-time, for 2 years. I have filed attachment alienation lawsuits against 7 of Jennifer's partners. I had no illusions that I would win at least one of them, but the law of the state of Illinois allowed it, so I returned with a gun in my hands. I have filed civil lawsuits against her employer and the companies of 3 clients who used my wife. Again, I didn't think I could win, but bad publicity could work in my favor. Finally, I sent a DVD of Jennifer's greatest hits to her parents and her best friend, so that she would know that I would not be afraid to take advantage of it. She should have known about the evidence I had against her. All of this was stated in my counterclaim, but I didn't want to take any chances. The children had a snack and went to their rooms to get ready for bed. They didn't pay attention to their mother. She made no move to address them. I went to the fridge to get a beer. Then I went into the living room and sat down on the chair opposite Jennifer. She didn't look at me for a long time, so I just enjoyed my beer. Besides being sick, she seemed to be crying about something. Was she injured? Eventually she spoke, but it was almost a whisper. "You're going to ruin me." I waited for her to look up so that I could follow her gaze when I answered. It took a few seconds. God, I hope so. I thought this moment would be more intense. When a single tear formed in her eye and then rolled down her cheek, I felt nothing. "Do you hate me that much?" "Oh no, Jennifer, I don't hate you. Hate takes effort. I can honestly say that I make absolutely no effort when it comes to you. All my efforts are spent on taking care of me and my children. But I'm your wife. Stop. I'm not going to let a piece of shit like you tarnish my wife's good name. My wife was a loving and caring woman, my best friend, partner, and mother of my children. She's dead. You're the cheater who took over her body. Don't talk like you have anything to do with me." It was a long time before she spoke again. "What should I do now? Is this a rhetorical question, or do you really want to hear my answer?" I didn't let her answer before continuing. "I believe there are several possible solutions to your problem. You can go far, far away and try to start a new life. I would choose this option. I will never allow my children to spend any meaningful time with you, so this should not affect your decision to leave in any way. Or I suppose you can try staying here, hanging around the city, trying to control myself. But who knows who will hear about your little exploits, or who will want to hire a fool like you. Maybe you can get attached to some loser who doesn't care that you're a cheater. But what kind of non-entity would that be? Or you can kill yourself. I really hope you don't choose this option. It will deprive me of the opportunity to watch you suffer like the fool that you are. But then again, I'm not sure if my opinion is really important to a fool like you. It definitely didn't matter when you decided to start making love to your boss. I've been dreaming of giving this little speech for months. I should have been glad to be able to say it. Watching everything that was left of her spirit crumble word by word, I hoped that I would get some satisfaction. Instead, I just felt empty. Life after the divorce was ambiguous. With the lawsuits, I was doing much better than I had hoped. I received just over $1 million in compensation from 3 companies whose employees slept with my wife. It was amazing because my lawyer told me not to expect much. During the post-game analysis, we decided that after seeing how he handled my ex-wife's company, they didn't want any part of the negative publicity. We destroyed my ex-wife's company with the help of petitions to open a case, giving evidence and leaking information to the press. I also started my own covert campaign, emailing the CEOs of their remaining clients, information about my wife, her boss, and their buddies. Do you really want to be in bed with this company when the shit hits the fan? It took a while, but gradually their income dried up. Employees who did not want to be associated with the scandal quit. Eventually, they filed for bankruptcy. Alan Henderson was fired and left town in disgrace. The $200,000 check I received was smaller than my other wins, but much more enjoyable. I have received nothing from my claims of alienation of affection. I never thought I'd get it. 4 wives, nevertheless, brought their husbands to the surface with subsequent divorces. It wasn't all about champagne and roses. In the process, I also hurt myself. It wasn't uncommon for me to come across someone familiar with my situation. For a while, the taunts and teasing got out of hand. I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately, but I didn't care. I already felt like a loser, so someone's words didn't touch me. Some of these bastards were actually pretty smart. I was able to protect my children from most of the collateral damage. This has always been my main concern. They were sad for a while, but soon recovered. The biggest victory was my return to CTS as Vice President of Design and Development. One of the ways to get away from personal troubles was to return to programming. In 2 dismal years, I was able to develop an add-on to the core CTS software that made it easy to integrate it with 2 other popular software packages from competitors. I started my own company and started selling my development. Less than a year later, I received offers from all 3 companies to buy my company and my software. I received $11 million for my company and an incredible compensation package from CTS. I considered retirement for a while, but due to the complete lack of a social life, I was sure that if I didn't give myself a reason to leave the house every day, I would become a recluse. My new income allowed me to hire a sweet little old lady who worked part-time as a housekeeper and babysitter for the children. A year later, Mrs. Marlene Jensen moved in with us full-time, settling in an apartment above the garage, our new home. She was like a grandmother to my children, mostly sweet and kind, but strict when necessary. Most of all, I appreciated the advice she could give to children, the ones that come only with experience. I loved my children and did my best to be a caring and attentive father. But I was also damaged, harassed, and cruel. I also turned to her for advice. She was my rock when it came time to make decisions. The children grew up to be well-adjusted adults, and I saw them and their families from time to time. Unfortunately, our intimacy has weakened over time. I was not offended by them in any way. It was better to keep me at a distance so that my bitterness would not infect their lives. Mrs. Jensen worked for me until the kids left for college. Then she retired. I offered her a free room and board as a pension. She has been a constant presence in my life for 15 years. She tried her best to get me to live again and find someone to share my life with. I appreciated her efforts, but in the end she died, knowing that I would always be alone. I never really opened up to anyone again. My friendships were superficial and unsatisfying. I've never gone on a date, except for a few group dinners organized by random friends. I have a well-deserved reputation as an icy-hearted, ruthless bastard who cannot be contradicted. For the most part, I was shunned, and I didn't blame anyone but myself. My needs were regulated quite well. My ever-growing wealth allowed me to maintain a constant rotation of call girls and escort services. I paid handsomely for their time and the use of their bodies. Basically, I just used them and escorted them out the door. I really liked one of them. Her name was Candy. Later, I found out that it was actually Mary Beth. She was a passionate and willing partner. I think I was more than a client to her, too. But I could never burden anyone else with my demons, so when I felt that she was too attached to me, I let her go. If you're wondering what happened to Jennifer, she had a hard life. She's been trying to talk to me for almost a year. I'm not sure exactly why she tried. Did she think that we could reconcile, or was she hoping for a relationship with my children? Maybe. I warned her honestly, but she didn't listen. She was trying to stay in Chicago, and I started following her. When she applied for a job, I made sure that her employment record was always there to greet her. When she started dating, and it happened almost immediately, I sent her potential partners parcels with wishes that they would know everything about the woman they let into their lives. I didn't care if they wanted to keep her around after they found out the truth, but I didn't want her to be able to reshape the story by ignoring it. I had to live with it every day, so it would be fair if she did it too. As I said, my ex-wife continued a constant campaign of unanswered phone calls, emails that I never read or answered, and always kept my email inbox full. I think some sick part of me wanted her to suffer. I believed that at the very beginning, it would be appropriate to seek professional help. Perhaps it would have saved a part of my soul and allowed me to return to a normal life. But in the end, I never went, and as time passed, it seemed too late to do anything. I could have changed my phone number, but I didn't. An assistant could sort my mail, but I've always done it myself. I could block her incoming emails. It would prevent me from accidentally opening one of them. It was a torrent of apologies that meant nothing. Of course, the situation got out of control. Of course, she always loved me. Hadn't she suffered enough? I replied with a gift and a simple note. I bought the most depraved underwear I could find at her favorite store and carefully wrapped it in a clean white ribbon, which greatly emphasized the pink color of the box. I attached a beautifully handwritten note. I'm sure she appreciated the symmetry when she opened the postcard addressed to the bitch. One of her potential suitors tried to hold me accountable for torturing my ex-wife. He appeared on my doorstep full of liquid courage, pushed me back and knocked me down when I opened the front door. It was his mistake. As I said before, I am nothing special. I did not practice martial arts and did not receive special forces training. I was an ordinary guy. I've never been a violent person. Hell, I've never even been in a fight. But what I had was rage, undiluted, unspent hatred for my wife and her lovers. He became the unfortunate recipient of my exit. As a result, I got off with a good burn and a broken rib. He was lucky to be alive. He pleaded guilty to misdemeanor assault and trespassing, and received probation as a first-time offender. I think the years of reconstructive surgery and rehabilitation made a greater impression on him. Jennifer never tried to contact me again. I stopped following her a year later when she found a full-time job cleaning rooms at a travel hotel in a town about 700 miles away in the Virginia countryside. The only time I saw her was 16 years later at my daughter's wedding. I know that the children reunited with Jennifer, a few years after graduating from college. I made no attempt to stop them from finding her. The years had not been kind to her. She gained at least 20 kilograms. She developed deep wrinkles around her lips and other signs of smoking. It was a new trend. Overall, she looked old and haggard. But underneath it all, I still saw the woman I gave my heart to. I didn't feel anything for her, but I saw her. She was sitting alone in the bridal section, not far from the back of the church. Her communication with my daughter was brief, cordial, but distant. She never tried to talk to me. Until the end of the evening, we didn't get closer than 10 meters to each other. She was standing on the street waiting for a taxi. When I saw it on her finger, I smiled for the first time in a long time. She probably did a better job than me, judging by the small gold ring and tiny diamond on her left ring finger. I went up to her and looked at him for a few moments. When I looked up to meet her gaze, there was a deep sadness in her gaze. For the record, first you ruined my life. I looked down at her left hand, then back into her eyes. I'm glad you found someone. I hope he makes you happy. I walked quickly to my car. My driver was waiting attentively. Good evening, Mr. Smith. I hope you had a pleasant evening, sir. Are we going to the club? It went as well as I could have hoped, Jonathan. Let's go straight back to the house. I think I'd like to be alone tonight. Of course, sir. As we drove away, I tried my best not to look back, but I caught her short wave of her hand. Goodbye. Michael Smith was not handsome. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about him, but he was very sweet, cute, and smart, and he was different from the other guys. Our first meeting took place probably on the most terrible night of my student life. My sisterhood sisters dumped me in the middle of a frat party. They promised that we would stick together all night, but jumped at the first chance to fool around with someone from the popular crowd. I spent 2 hours waiting for them, being molested and groped by a bunch of drunken jerks when he finally came up to me. Michael looked straight into my eyes. He introduced himself politely and made small talk for a few moments. He spoke almost in a whisper, but his eyes never left mine. After a while, he left. It was a pleasure talking to you, Jennifer. I'd like to invite you for coffee sometime. Here's my name and phone number if you're interested. Thank you for talking to me. It was the highlight of my semester. I admit I didn't call him. I waited a little over a week before I decided what the hell. We met over a cup of coffee. He asked me all kinds of questions. I found it very easy to talk to him. During the first conversation, I realized what makes him unique. Outwardly, he was quiet and unassuming. He didn't look bad. Perhaps he was even a little handsome. But he was a genius, it was clear. He could talk about any topic and was well-versed in all the questions I asked him. He said he was studying computer science, but obviously he could have chosen any other specialty. We started talking about my subjects, especially those with which I had problems, in particular ancient philosophy. I specialized in business and advertising. Unfortunately, I was putting off some of my least favorite electives, and it was a little harder for me than I had hoped. Michael's eyes never left me. Just like the first time we met, he looked straight into my eyes the whole time we were talking. His motive was clear. He was genuinely interested in me as a person. I was flattered. He suggested that we study together at the student union or at the library. So 3 days later, we were together again. I wouldn't call it studying. It would be better to call it advanced tutoring. Michael spent 3 hours in the library on Friday evening giving me the help I needed to take my philosophy exam. When I didn't understand something, he apologized for his teaching methods and tried something else. He was so patient. He never made me feel stupid when I didn't understand something. I could feel his excitement on the phone when I called him to tell him that I passed the exam last Tuesday. I could tell he was proud of me. He did not accept any praise for the help, saying that in fact, he was selfish in trying to spend time with me, and that it was the most enjoyable time he spent on campus. I found out that Michael is not like most other guys. During the week, he was completely focused on his studies. There were no parties, absolutely no drinking, and nothing to distract him. It annoyed me at first, but it interested me. For the next few weeks, we didn't go on what I would call dates, but he called every day just to talk to me and see how I was doing. He left me notes to let me know what he thought of me. We still met for a cup of coffee or in the library, and once or twice we had lunch together. When we were together, he kept asking questions about me, my family, my interests, my dreams. If I asked him questions, he was open and honest. One day I asked him if he was afraid of anything. That was my constant dating question. I read somewhere in a magazine that this is a good question to understand how much a person trusts you. I was ready for the typical answers of the brothers. In the past, they ranged from nothing to that I would drop out of college without partying like I should. Michael just sat in silence for a minute, staring into space. Then he looked into my eyes and said, "I'm afraid I won't be a good father." I was an only child. My mother and father died when I was in high school, but we were never very close. Before graduating from high school, I lived with my uncle. He was a big womanizer, and we had very little in common. I think he was relieved when I left for college. I want to get married. I want children. But I have no experience of living in a loving, supportive family. I want to be a good father, but I'm afraid I don't know how. When he stopped talking, I think he was looking for some kind of answer. "Too much?" he asked. "No, Michael, not too much. Just enough is enough." About 4 weeks into our relationship, Michael asked me if my Saturday was open. I replied that I did, and he said that he would come into the sorority at lunchtime. The days leading up to that Saturday were strange. I kept asking Michael what he was planning. He didn't tell me. My sisters in the sisterhood smiled at me and whispered to each other. I was on edge when he finally showed up. He was dressed in burgundy and sky blue clothes. 3 brothers from his fraternity were dressed in the same way and carried a large refrigerator and 2 huge heated trays of food. Michael had a DVD in one hand, a West Ham t-shirt for me in the other, and a big smile on his face. He asked me to show him the big room of the house. When we turned the corner, most of the residents of the house were dressed in West Ham colors and started chanting. I was shocked. Once, for maybe 30 seconds, I complained that I had missed my family's trip to England. I had a distant cousin who joined the West Ham United club team, and my family planned a trip to London to watch him play. Unfortunately, the trip came during a very important test week for me, and I was unable to go. I was very disappointed and shared it with Michael. He asked a friend from a local sports bar to record West Ham's game from a satellite. He studied team chants, taught them to his friends and my sisters in the sisterhood, and watched the game to know when to start them. He and his friends brought several cases of English ale and cooked fish and potatoes. While the game was going on, we sang, drank, and were sick. At the 72nd minute, he silenced everyone and told me to pay attention to the screen. I was able to see my cousin score his first goal in the Premier League, of course, with a delay. No one else in my family could have done it again. It was the nicest thing anyone has ever done for me. When it was over, he and his friends cleaned up after themselves and hit the road. Michael said he would call me later. I was left alone to fend off teasers about the dreamy look in my eyes. It was worth it. Our phone calls, notes, and coffee continued for another couple of weeks, until one day, sipping a latte, I noticed that he looked extremely nervous. "Is everything all right, Michael?" "What?" "Oh, yes, sure. I just wanted to ask if you have any plans for Friday night. And if you're free, would you like to have dinner with me? Well, like a date. With me. On Friday." "I'd love to have dinner with you, Michael." The look of relief on his face was amazing. It was quickly replaced by one of the widest smiles I've ever seen. It was on his face when he finished his coffee, when we walked out the door, and when he turned to wave at me one last time as he walked to class. I could see it, almost a block away. From that moment on, everything became a perfect whirlwind of love, romance, and friendship. I did better at school than ever. I was having more fun than I've ever had in my life. People treated me differently, too. I was more comfortable being myself, the woman Michael loved, and I think people were attracted to that. I will say that being with Michael was like getting a vitamin for the ego every day. Maybe he always underestimated himself, but he never hesitated to describe me in enthusiastic terms. In fact, it was probably just the opposite. Michael was a pretty enough guy who was in shape, if not a little athletic. He has always been well-groomed, bordering on style. He was pleasant to talk to and liked, but was a little shy of new people. I can say without a doubt that he was always the smartest person in the room, including the professors, and everyone knew it. But with a casual demeanor, he avoided attention in order to spend time with me. He often told me that he was an ordinary guy who won the lottery when he met me. I would describe myself as pretty. My friends described me as pretty. My family described me as pretty. I've always been a little shy about my appearance and my body. It was hard not to. Some of my sorority sisters were gorgeous, with model looks and matching bikini bodies, but it was hard not to feel that I had something special, looking at myself through Michael's eyes. I can say that the longer I was with Michael, the more valuable I felt. I was over the moon when it was time for graduation. One of the silly end-of-year rituals in sorority was playing potential husband. Being one of the few sisters who didn't have a long-term boyfriend, I could never take part in it. For a large group of graduates, it was a favorite event, and there were always a lot of guests. It was simple enough. Each sister alone spoke to the assembled graduates and could give a positive or negative example of another sister's boyfriend during the previous year. The winner was the sister whose boyfriend received the most positive feedback. I can't say that I was completely shocked by the result, but I was a little shocked. For the first time in the 29-year history of this event, my Michael received all the positive feedback, one from each sister. I have never felt such pride and was a little disappointed that, according to tradition, I would not be able to inform him of his victory. 3 days later, I finally found a way to reward him. The day after graduation, Michael drove me home. I was from Chicago, and Michael was offered a job there. We spent 4 hours on the road holding hands and talking. We stopped for a quick breakfast and a kiss. We arrived at my childhood home just before lunch. Michael spent the next 2 hours charming my parents. I was a little surprised when he asked if he could buy my dad a beer. They left before I could protest. My mom was smiling through misty eyes. "Oh, Jennifer, this one is a guardian. Trust me, Mom. I know." Michael and Dad were smiling and laughing all the way to the front door when they finally returned 2 hours later. Michael told me that he would come back for dinner after checking into the hotel, quickly said goodbye to my parents, and left. Finally, he told me that he had asked my father for permission to marry me. I will never forget that evening. It was magical. After a wonderful romantic Italian dinner, Michael proposed to me on the sky deck of the Willis Tower. It was a beautiful, clear evening, and the lights of the Chicago skyline almost matched the glow in my heart. When I was in college, a virgin was always a source of mild embarrassment. I'm sure I was the only virgin left in the house. But that night it was a precious gift, part of a suitable kit. Michael gave himself to me that night. I felt it. He treasured my virginity as only he could. He was patient, loving, and gentle. He created a magnificent wave of love and lust, and then took me with him. I couldn't have dreamed of a more perfect contact, especially for the first time. I knew that Michael was also a virgin, with very little experience with the opposite sex. I asked where he learned to be such a fantastic lover. More modestly than ever, he whispered to me. "I'm reading. Very much. Our life was almost perfect. Michael got a good job right after graduating from university. He was constantly being promoted, and I was happier than ever. I don't want to say that these years downplay their importance to me. I can't find the words to express how happy I was in the first decade of our life together. I would be completely inadequate if I described how having children ended my life. I'm not telling you the details of those years because they have nothing to do with my downfall. In fact, if I tell you about these years, it will only confuse you with the motives that led to my downfall. I know my mistake. No, it's better to say that I was wrong. I know why I fell. I didn't trust Michael enough. One of the things I loved most about Michael was that he never hid his vulnerability from me. He shared with me his whole being, almost the most important thing, his insecurity. He never hid from me. For a long time, I had nothing to hide. My life was a fairy tale. My family was wonderful. Michael has never treated me as anything other than a full partner. I was involved in every decision that affected our lives. It didn't matter that he earned 5 times more than me or managed our finances better. He always turned to me for advice and consent. Mostly it made me feel special, but sometimes it made me feel inferior, like I wasn't keeping my end of the bargain. I've never shared this with Michael. If I had shared, I would never have ruined my life. He would have helped me. I know it. He loved me so much. He would help me feel whole. This little uncertainty grew and grew over the years. Maybe it's festering. Anyway, by the time the kids started school, I was lost in my own skin. I felt like I needed something else that would give me an independent goal. I wasn't looking for a lover by any means. I loved my husband. I was more than satisfied in the bedroom. Our life has been passionate, although maybe a little drawn out. It was mostly my fault. I knew my husband wanted to be a little more experimental is probably the most appropriate word. But I just decided that why spoil a good thing? No, I wanted to feel equal, not just to be treated as an equal. So I found a job and announced that I was taking it on. I had everything thought out. I was fully prepared to defend my reasons for wanting to get a job. Our argument lasted 4 seconds. I think that sounds great, Jennifer. Anything that will make you happy. And it worked. I've solved my problem. All by myself. I didn't need any help. The sheer vanity of my thoughts manifested in those first few months made me sick afterwards. But at the time, it was exciting. I felt like an independent, self-confident woman capable of fighting the world. The mood in our office could be described as flirting. At worst, it could be called a brothel of debauchery. My colleagues, both men and women, were young, brave, and energetic. There were several office affairs between the employees. My boss was probably the worst of them all. Alan Henderson was a pretty good-looking guy, although not exactly my type. People always teased him, saying that he couldn't keep a girl, and congratulated him on his latest conquest. I didn't jump into bed with the first guy who molested me. In fact, I turned him down. Hard. But it made me wonder if Michael and I were missing something in our lives. Our group of friends were quite restrained when it came to bed. There wasn't a single conversation in our neighborhood that even came close to the daily barrage I heard in the office. After our first Christmas party at the company, when I introduced Alan to Michael, my life changed forever. I could tell they didn't like each other, even though they pretended to get along fine. I stopped talking to Michael about my work and never mentioned Alan. I could tell that my job and the boss bothered him. After that night, I noticed that everything in the office had changed. Alan started paying a lot of attention to me, praising my work in front of people and asking how I was feeling. He started asking me to share lunch with him. We always discussed our latest project for a long time. He began to ask my opinion more and more often. Then he would ask some personal questions, and we would end the conversation and get back to work. He also started complimenting me on my appearance, using words like provocative. Looking back, I can say that he worked on me for months, and I, like a fool, absorbed him. I don't remember the exact sequence of events that led to me being half naked, and Alan using me on his desk after everyone else had gone home. It is with the deepest sorrow that I admit that I enjoyed every minute of it. Alan's skillful seduction left me feeling desirable, emotions that I thought were long gone. Years later, analyzing my behavior, I realized the full extent of my betrayal. I didn't feel like Michael wanted me because I wasn't giving him anything that could be desired. I knew what kind of person he was. He would never do anything to make me feel uncomfortable. I was his true partner and cherished lover. But he was very perceptive. The slightest hint on my part would be enough. Any hint that I wanted something different would have drastic consequences. A painful analysis of my married life showed that Michael was clearly cautiously probing every opportunity to activate our lives, and I ignored him. I am terribly ashamed to admit that I did all this and much more for Alan. I got too deep into my relationship with Alan before I realized the truth. He treated me the way I deserved to be treated. I gave him a gift, and he used it. It was painful. The contrast with Michael was striking and almost immediately changed my mindset. Alan didn't love me, and I was making a terrible mistake. I told Alan that our affair was over the next day. He laughed at me and pushed me out of his office. The package was on my desk when I returned from lunch, along with a note about the need to be at Alan's office at 5:30 p.m. The contents of the package guaranteed my fulfillment. Photos of Alan using me. I tried my best to find a way out and always found myself in a difficult position. And only when I could no longer accept the depravity of my actions, the solution to my problems came by itself. I have found a solution that has eluded me for so long. Courage. I told Alan that I had had enough. I didn't care who he showed the photos to. He just laughed and it was over. I felt like such a fool. I must say that when I woke up from my nightmare, I was surprised by the condition of our house. Michael and the kids seemed to be doing just fine without me. Deep down, I thought they would struggle when they were forced to face the kind of neglect I had imposed on them. But it was exactly the opposite. It seemed that I was not needed at all. Michael was clearly staying on top. He had a new car, new clothes, and he looked like a pretty successful executive. I felt terrible when I realized how long I had ignored my family. I decided that right now I would dedicate my life to them and do everything possible to make amends for my betrayal. But there was a distance between us that hadn't been there before. I often wondered how long it lasted. Michael never raised his voice at me. We never quarreled, but he treated me like an uninvited guest. I decided that I needed to act according to the full program. I tried to seduce him. Hints, nothing helped. He barely touched me. After a few months, I looked at the state of our marriage. No bed life, no intimacy, no communication. I decided that I couldn't live like this. I offered marriage counseling. Then Michael stopped talking to me. I don't just mean that he didn't trust me. He just stopped talking. Not a word for weeks. I was on edge when my birthday came. I allowed myself to feel a little nervous. After all, he couldn't ignore me on my birthday. God, I was wrong. I came home from work ready to see what my family had planned, but found the house empty. Only a small wrapped box on the dining table was the only thing standing in its place. I knew what it was even before I opened it. A few years earlier, I had forgotten about Michael's birthday. In a panic, I found an inexpensive watch in a store on the next street. I intended to correct my mistake later, but I never gathered my thoughts and eventually forgot about it. My gift was a mistake, but his gift was calculated. By the time I went to bed, I was furious. Keeping the kids away from me on my birthday was just cruel. I couldn't believe he would do this to me. And the gift! This is already crossing all boundaries. I should have realized that something was terribly wrong. Symbolism should have been enough. Michael was not an evil man. He was the most gentle, caring, and loving person I have ever met. If I hadn't been so overshadowed by my anger over that damn gift, I could have saved my marriage. If I confessed my sins and asked for forgiveness, maybe there would be hope. Unfortunately, at that moment, I stopped thinking about working on my marriage and started thinking about divorce. I was sad, but I was determined. It took me several weeks to work out all the details with a lawyer. I told her about how Michael was distant and even violent, how he kept the kids away from me, how he ignored my requests to go to a consultation, how he stopped talking to me. My lawyer lashed out at my comments. She said I would get a good compensation. We have reviewed the claim. I felt that I was doing the right thing, but at the same time I was defending what I needed for a normal life. All that remained was to tell the bad news. I stood silently in the doorway of the office and looked at the man who had once been my husband, my soulmate. He looked like the same person, but it wasn't him. Finally, I had had enough. Michael, I want a divorce. There was a long silence, but I didn't see any emotion on his face. I thought he smiled, but most likely he was just in shock. He should have been shocked because his reaction was not what I expected. No shouting, no questions. Good, that's all. The following Friday, he was handed my divorce application. This weekend, Michael was in a better mood. But if he was trying to make amends, it was already too late. I wasn't in the mood for reconciliation. He even said goodbye to me at the door when I left for work on Monday morning. Too little, too late, I thought. When I arrived at the office, I realized that there was a big problem, but I had no idea what it was. My boss, the president of our company, and our corporate lawyer were arguing in the conference room. Fists full of papers were being waved around. I was so busy watching the tantrum that I didn't notice the man who was waiting for me near my workplace. He scared me when he spoke. Jennifer Smith? Yes. You have been served. The man handed me a massive envelope, took a picture of me, and left. I didn't even have a chance to sit down, let alone look at the contents of the envelope. As soon as the man left, the security guard and the HR manager stood in front of me. Mrs. Smith, you are suspended from work, pending an investigation into allegations of inappropriate behavior in the workplace. Please pack your personal belongings and leave the building, she said. It was humiliating to pack my things while my colleagues were watching. It was even worse when I was escorted out of the building. I had no idea what was going on. I had barely left the parking lot when my phone rang. It was my lawyer. I didn't even have time to say hello as she already started telling me off. Hiding important information and making her look like an idiot were the only phrases that made sense. I drove home in silence. The house was empty again when I arrived. I had no idea what kind of hell I had unleashed until I finally calmed down enough to remember the envelope. Michael's counter-petition was crushing. Almost all of my extramarital affairs have been documented. There was no money. He spent almost all of our savings. Most of all, I was struck by the word adultery. I thought my life couldn't be worse. Then I tried to call my parents. I needed support. My father called me a fool and hung up on me. He didn't need to explain to me why he thought that. I knew it. The next 7 days were the loneliest of my life, but years later, I will remember them fondly as good days. Michael left a note, which I found later, saying that he had taken the children camping and would be back on Sunday. That first night, my older friend Rebecca called around 7 o'clock to find out how I was. She told me that Michael had sent her a DVD and that I didn't want to know what was on it. Over the next few days, my lawyer described in detail the hopelessness of my situation. I was fired due to a violation of labor discipline, and a lawsuit was filed against my company, several clients of the company, and all my partners. I will lose custody of my children. I will lose everything. At that moment, I was ready for anything if only Michael would stop all lawsuits. I was trying to prepare for his return. Unfortunately, I couldn't stop crying. When my family returned home, I was in a complete mess. The children walked past me as if I wasn't even in the room. Michael came in a few minutes later, beer in hand, looking like he didn't care about anything. I could barely bring myself to speak. "You're going to ruin me." The pure hatred in his voice destroyed me. God, I hope so. When I tried to bring up the subject of our history as husband and wife, he called me a fool. At that moment, I wasn't even talking to him. I was just thinking out loud. But Michael launched into a tirade that lasted several minutes. Every word tore me apart. Then he got up and left the room. I can honestly say that I didn't give up. I was trying to reconnect with Michael, but he didn't want to talk to me. I was wondering how Michael and the kids were coping without money, but it seemed like everything was fine. Sometimes I would secretly watch him drop them off or pick them up from school. I couldn't find a job and was receiving unemployment benefits. My parents didn't want to talk to me. I needed to live somewhere, so I started moving from one to the other, mostly to divorced men. No one wanted to leave me around for long. One day everything was fine, and the other day they wanted me to leave. On the advice of a lawyer, I started going to a therapist. She believed that if I repented of my behavior and tried to get professional help on my own, it would help me in court. I had very little hope. I managed to work out some points, most of which I shared with you. But my therapist's best advice came towards the end of our classes. She advised me to run far, far away. I'm not sure exactly why he decided to answer me. It could have been a phone call, an email, or even one of the dozens of emails I sent. But whatever it was, I came home and there was a package waiting for me from Michael. I immediately recognized the store's standard gift box. The postcard was addressed to me in a rather vulgar manner. He knew almost everything. He really hated me and had a very specific suggestion on how I could make the best use of my time. I do not know why the realization that he knew about my voluntary betrayal was so much worse. But it was like that. I was crying, strongly. At that time, I was staying with a friend of a friend, a decent guy named Robert. I think he had plans to make our relationship something more than just a neighborhood. When he came into the room to find out what had happened, I realized that he had been drinking. When he saw the package, he was furious and walked out the door before I could stop him. I was worried when, a few hours later, Robert was not at home. I should have. The nurses at the hospital were tight-lipped about the details, but they knew most of the story. Obviously, Robert went into conflict with Michael. Michael almost beat him to death. His face was disfigured. He had a concussion, several internal injuries, and a fractured left hip. I was terrified. My problems were now infecting the people around me. At the next session, I told this story to my therapist. She started asking me questions about Michael. I told her everything I knew. He was an only child, he had no family. He was orphaned as a teenager. I told him about our young love, about his devotion to me and the children. I told him about his actions during the 2 years when he should have known about my infidelity and subsequent behavior, and I told her what Michael had done to Robert. When I finished, she looked scared. "You have to get as far away from here as possible. Leave him alone. Don't call him. Don't write to him. Don't let him know where you are. There is no hope of reconciliation. Don't even try. Move on with your life. If you put pressure on him, the most likely result will be that he will kill you. Your actions have clearly broken a man with a fragile mind. He had endured disappointment after disappointment all his life. He will never forgive you. He will never forget. Run away." And I ran away. I ran away from the memories of my perfect life to a shitty college town in Virginia, where I found an even shittier job. A few years later, I found a man who could tolerate me and ignore my past. The best thing I can say about him is that he didn't stink or hit me. There was no love between us, only friendship. I'm sure that was part of my punishment. My children contacted me when they got older, just to say hello and let me know that they are alive and know that I am too. They never asked to see me or play any meaningful role in their lives. Michael, well, he thrived without me. I followed his news as much as I could. He has always been a superstar in the software industry, and he had a huge fortune to prove it. Nothing special was written about his personal life. I saw him one more time at my daughter's wedding. I was surprised that I was invited. He looked fantastic. He looked like the man to whom my heart belonged and whom I had betrayed. I admit, I was a little scared when he came up to me for one last gloat. "For the record, you ruined my life first." He stared at my paltry wedding ring. At that moment, I regretted putting it on my finger. "I'm glad you found someone. I hope he makes you happy." And then he left.